You're listening to the I Love You Keep Going podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome everybody. This is I Love You Keep Going. It is April 28th, 2022 at 7:35 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I was hoping that in the last session we would be able to wrap up this advanced mentalizing stuff, but we didn't actually get all the way through it. So I thought that I would just see how far we get today. One of the things that I really would like to be able to do is to tie together the metacognitive skills list from the Dan Brown Ken Wilber Angler list, and then tie it into the meta-modern list that's in the Hansi Freinack book, which is a more systematic approach and less a spiritual approach. When we were talking about this last time, we got through the 12th stage of this, which is the systematic stage, 18 and above, if at all. And that is where you can identify patterns among linear relationships, thus forming systems of relationships among abstract variables and how these interact, can thereby also solve equations with several unknowns. The first post-formal stage, it is not described by Piaget, but implicated in Kohlberg's work, begins to discuss legal systems, social structures, ecosystems, economic systems, and the like, and can be found in about 20% of human adults, usually after the age of 18. So if you can mentalize at this level, you can begin to have a sense of how everything works, our system works, how relationships work. But it does point to certainly a part of the way in which our overall system of society works, that 80% of people don't reach this point in mentalizing. And so when we look at the intractable nature of problems that we have in the world, it becomes more understandable that we have not yet developed an education system or other systems in our society that would help people develop the capacity to mentalize enough to understand what to do. I often wonder about that, and also how to then teach mentalizing at that level. One of the reasons that I like Vipassana meditation so much is because it's really good at teaching mentalizing. It's teaching you to monitor and track the processes of yourself and your perception of the world. First, we divide everything up into these strands, and then we watch the strands come together to form the experiences that we have. And as you push into your meditation practice and examine it, you begin to see that conceptual reality is something that you create based on your conditioning and is not necessarily an accurate representation of what actually is happening. And then you can begin to track where you distorted things based on conditioning. And this is actually the basis of understanding mentalizing. And once you're able to track that at your own system level and begin to have an understanding of that, you can then take that same skill and begin to examine the larger systems around you. The the meta-systemic stage, early 20s and above, if at all, can compare and synthesize several systems with differing logics, put together meta-systems or conclusions that hold true across different systems, reflect upon and names general priorities of systems, understands that things can be homomorphic, isomorphic, etc., This means that you can see how one system can be changed in corresponding or differing ways to another system, and can be found in about 1.5% of the adult population, usually after the early 20s. So I think this is really one of the things that stands out the most to me in the nature of for instance, the political dialogue that we have. We have these two sides that represent the idea of the system that we live in so differently, that if you cannot synthesize these two different systems and understand them and then relate them across the two systems, it's not really possible to have a dialogue that means the same thing to either half, which is one of the reasons why we get so polarized in our discussions, and how it's so easy to take umbrage or have your feelings hurt, or really see a kind of extreme um, uh, assign the meaning of fairly extreme intention to the other side. Um, because the meaning of the representations on one side do not mean the same thing to the other side. The definitions are not the same. When one system expresses itself, the other system takes up the meanings that system knows and assigns the meaning from there. And because the meanings are so different, it creates these very stark versions of reality that you can even make intentional because of the way that the experience is formed. Is that making sense so far? So that if you can then mentalize at a level where you can understand each of the systems and then link the meanings, even though the expressions are different across the systems, that it actually begins to facilitate a communication where each side is being heard by the other side, and where there is a mutual intention that can be aligned, and there's a possibility of moving forward with that. I think one of the things that I appreciated so much about Dan Brown's teaching was that he was able to do that with the traditional Tibetan practices of teaching and the Western pedagogic experience that most of us have, so that he could relate those early teachings in a way that resonated in the language of the current Western society, which I often find doesn't happen with other teachers. And so the traditional teachings remain this very barren place rather than something that feels alive and connected. The pragmatic stage, mid-20s and above, if at all, can deal with several very abstract metasystems to create new ways of thinking about the world, new paradigms, new sciences, or branches within scientists, has a fractal way of thinking so that the universal principles found are applicable to many different levels of analysis and phenomena. Prevalence unknown, but if the pattern holds and every stage seems to increase with about a standard deviation, it should be little more than one adult in 1,000 in the normal population, mostly above the age of 25. This makes it rare. Still some 3 million people in the world. So when you move past the possibility of relating more than one system, you move into a place where you actually can create a system or a new paradigm of thinking, which is quite unusual. In Western psychology, of course, we give that to Freud, and then the development from there. In Buddhism, we talk about the Buddha being this seminal person who devised a view of the world that's quite different. But if you look over the course of history, there aren't so many people that have come up with a whole new paradigm in which we can understand the nature of this human life. I think that in Dan Brown's work with the development of ideal parent figure in that paradigm, it actually is that synthesis of the two systems of Mahamudra and Western psychology, and then that there is a shift there. And then 15 is cross paradigmatic stage, can deal with several paradigms to create new fields. Examples are Newton's reformulation of physics, Darwin's theory of evolution, Einstein's theory of relativity, the invention of quantum physics, the invention of chaos mathematics, complexity, the invention of computing, the invention of postmodern philosophy, the invention of holistic integrated theory of Ken Wilber, the invention of string theory, the invention of MHC theory. I'm not sure what that is. Prevalence unknown, found only in adults over 20 and who have privileged circumstances, and most often shows up around age 30. No reliable test for that stage. Wouldn't it be nice if we could teach more people to be able to do that? And come up with a systematic approach where you could go through these stages, and as you see it, come into the capacity to do this, since we need the earth, and us on the earth needs a lot of help at the moment. Christian.
But I mean, like, a lot of the people that create those kinds of theories are weirdos, aren't they? You know, so like, are they advanced in terms of mentalizing, or do they have a
Or
very,
just a weird.
right? Do they have like kind of a very narrow set of abilities that, like, I mean, their attachment stuff could be totally jacked up, but they might have like this really specific, you know, like, maybe this is sort of similar to like the tortured artist idea, but maybe that's not necessary for it. But like, if you're getting to these levels of being able to synthesize these ideas, is that actually high mentalizing across the board, or is that just a really specific thing?
Well, it did say in the description that it's a very privileged place. So that if you look at these people that did all of those things, by and large, they're in a privileged place in society where they actually have the resources to be able to engage in the activities that would lead to that, whereas most people don't have that. One of the things that attachment theory demonstrates to us is that our concern for the well-being of children and what we do as a society to support the development of children is fairly weak. If you look at the spectrum of secure functioning attachment in the whole population, when 28% of people have secure attachment and 72% don't, and then you really understand that it's an astonishingly low bar to have secure attachment. 30% of the time you have to have your needs met in a good enough way, not perfectly. So for 72% of the population, that doesn't really happen. And then the difficulties that arise from that, the inequality in terms of the distribution of resources is also a problem. It's hard to know that whether you would have to be this extraordinary weirdo with a lot of privilege in order to be able to pull this off, or that it's more the capacities are more widely distributed, but they're not developed in a way in people because of the distribution of resources. Is that making sense? In our structured society, in our racist society, you don't even get to start. You don't even get to play if you're not in the right group. So it's hard to know. what the distribution of that would be in something that was actually a level field, level playing field. Maybe this is the place for depth. Depth is also something to consider. One of the things that happens in privilege is that you don't really develop depth. So depth, of course, is this capacity to bridge different states and integrate the experience of the different states so that you have fluidity of moving between the understanding of what those states are like. And people who tend to have a lot of privilege don't tend to have a wide range of states that they've had to navigate throughout their lives. So they don't have that integrated knowledge that people who have harsh circumstances have. And I think it's one of the reasons why in this country the Buddhist practice has striated in the way that it has, where you see in the sort of Theravada movement, it's mainly upper middle class or better off. They're jokingly called the upper middle way in some circles. And it's predominantly white, it's predominantly educated. There's not a lot of space for people who aren't resourced, so that you'll notice that the retreats, although they might seem moderate to you, are very expensive for most people, unaffordable for most people, except in that particular demographic. So, and then you go to these centers, which are quite posh, and meet similar kinds of people. In the Nairishan Buddhist tradition, it's primarily poor people and primarily people of color. I would say 80% or so people of color. It's also called prosperity Buddhism. So it's really about trying to climb up to find the wherewithal to actually move out of poverty, move out of those kinds of restrictions into something that's better, which would make sense. There's a lot of conversation in the world that I'm in about how do we diversify the sanghas that we have, which are primarily white. And one of the things that we would need to do is to teach something that was relevant to people who are not already affluent, but it's completely uninteresting to people that are already affluent. And since they're the ones who are providing the funding for the centers and the topics, that it doesn't come up really. One difference in the Mettagroup world, of course, is that we're focused on attachment, and so there is a portion of the affluent that have insecure, disorganized attachment. But when you compare the spreads in the general population, 28% are secure, 20% are dismissing, 20% are preoccupied, and 32% are disorganized. When you get up into the affluent group, it's 65% are secure, 15% dismissing, 15% preoccupied, and less than 5% of people are disorganized. So it's a whole different level of functioning in the two worlds. And because of the lack of depth in the affluent world, there's very little understanding for the difficulties that come from having traversed these multiple levels of difficulty. And there's a tremendous impatience that happens, I notice, or at least as my personal experience in teaching classes is, the people that don't function very well go really slowly, and it's really hard for them to mentalize or to grab any kind of concepts. And the people who are already affluent get it right away and want to go fast. They want to go at their speed. But if we went at their speed, they mentalize so much faster than people who haven't got that level of attachment. we would have to leave them behind. And there isn't enough compassion or a sense of value in going at the pace where the lower end of functioning people need to go. And so it creates this divergence where the people who can already mentalize and already set goals and know how to achieve them want to go at that pace, and then the other people go, incrementally and very slow. But let me talk about the scales of depth. The lower states, the first one is hell, that's the bottom. The second one is horrific, so phenomenological reality breaks down. Tortured is 3, tormented is 4. Then you move into the middle states, very uneasy, uncomfortable, somewhat easy, okay, full of small faults is 7. 8 is satisfied, well. 9 is good and lively. 10 is joyous, full of light, invigorated. And then the high states are the vast, grand, open, the blissful, the saintly, and then the enlightened and spiritual unity. So if you came from an experience of life that the most difficult it was somewhat uneasy, even if you transcend to blissful and saintly, it isn't encompassing the lower states at all, really. So there's no understanding of that. If you don't integrate the experience of it, then of the lower states, then what you tend to be is trauma reactive rather than deep. And that often happens, I notice, is that the integration hasn't been developed in people. And so when the process of recognizing associations to lower states happen, it creates a phenomenological reality break in their ability to perceive conceptual reality. So just to review it, you have the capacity to sense something, an object which can be sensed. If there's contact, a consciousness of that sensing experience arises, which is evaluated for urgency, needs immediate attention, doesn't really matter if you get to it. Pleasant, if there's time, then that's compared to the perceptual database. And if there's a previous experience that's close enough to a raw, undifferentiated fixing experience, that meaning is associated with that sensing experience and it flips into conceptual reality. If the mind is equanimous, then it's a pretty good transfer. And if there's different kinds of views or mind states present in there, then the way that conceptual reality is formed is distorted. And so what we begin to do in the meditation practice, of course, is try to track the distortions to see what's actually happening, so we can tell the difference between when we've created a fairly good version of conceptual reality and when the mind is, say, angry and it's distorted things, or when the mind is joyful and it's distorted things. And the list that Dan and Ken Wilber's created, I don't know, it's probably 40 or 50 years ago at this point. Their focus was more on the development of your spiritual sense. So the list that I read before was really more anchored in systems understanding, and this list is more around being able to track your spiritual development. So that we're practicing meditation, we're taking on these different practices that we do. Is there some way that you could gauge whether the practice was actually having the desired effect that you wanted? Are you actually able to gauge what that effect would be? And then so in the basic skills, which we talk about quite a bit, Awareness of the state of mind of self and others. So awareness that you have a mind state and other people have a mind state and that they're different and that that's actually just how it is. What happens when you don't mentalize at that level, of course, is that you think that you're creating a version of reality that's accurate, that everybody's having the same experience that you are and creating the same version of reality that you are. And you can then assign intention and meaning to the actions that they take because they're inhabiting the same experience that you are inhabiting. So we call that non-mentalizing or psychic equivalence mode using the Peter Fonagy, Anthony Bateman list. What happens next is monitoring the accuracy of the state of mind. So as we begin to practice meditation, as we begin to track the sensing experiences as they activate and then the meaning we assign to them, we begin to understand, are we accurately creating a version of what's happening or is there a distortion there? So we begin to be able to track the different mind states. 3 is awareness of one's own influence on another state or behavior and vice versa. So if you look at the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha described this as mindfulness of inside, mindfulness of outside, and mindfulness of inside and outside. So can you track that? This is the experience I'm having. This is the action and I take. It has an effect on the other person. Can I understand the effect that it's having? And then they respond, and that has an effect on me, and I track all of that in real time. Then the 4th one is becoming becoming aware of one's state of mind in such a way that it has a regulating effect on that. So we call this, or I like to talk about it as emotional regulation. Do you have strategies that you can use to regulate the experience that you have when you react to the conditions of the present moment? So we have, using Dan Siegel, the window of tolerance. If we react to the present moment in a way that exceeds the window of tolerance and we're in a dysregulated state, do we have effective strategies that we can bring to regulating those experiences? Christian?
Is the way that you just formulated that, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it almost sounds like it's implying that actually being aware of your mind state itself can have a regulating effect on it. And I think I've experienced that.
Yes, I would agree. That one of the reasons that we use metta jhana in the way that we practice is that we want you to be able to recognize the mind state, and then we want you to have agency into pulling an afflictive mind state and replacing it with a beneficial mind state, so that you can do that in real time. That's the training of this particular aspect of mentalizing.
But I don't even mean that. I mean sort of prior to that. Like today, I was sitting and thinking about work and making myself angry, thinking about how stupid work is. And then I was watching my mind state go up and down. And then I was like, okay, my mind state's going up and down, but just me watching it kind of gave me some space with it.
Right.
I didn't have to do anything intentionally. I didn't have to do any like meta practice or anything like that as a result.
No, but
I just started laughing, thinking about how
you were already able to mentalize that well enough that you could track the mind state.
Right.
How did you learn to do that?
Probably through all this crap.
You could have also learned it at home with your caregivers if they were attentive
I don't know about that one.
you. All right. I'm happy to take all the credit, but only if it's deserved. The 5th one is awareness of one's own and another's action plans or goal directedness. So this is about agendas, and this should happen very early in life. When you're about 18 months old is really when this begins to happen, that you recognize that you're autonomous and you have an agenda, and that other people are autonomous and have an agenda, and that you can negotiate agendas. that making sense? So the example that's often given with children is the child is hungry and wants to be fed, but they know that then the caregiver has to prepare the food for them to eat. So once they make the demand that they want to be fed and they see that the caregiver is then preparing the food, they can stop their demand for being fed because they know that the caregiver has to prepare the food. So the caregiver prepares the food and then brings it to feed the child, but the child has had the recognition that their communication has landed, it's had the effect that they want, and then they can wait that period that's necessary, and that's the process of that. But then in adult relationships, of course, we all have our own agendas and purposes, and well, in adult relationships, you have to be able to negotiate those. Stop, Lucy, stop. Making sense. Number 6 is meaning making. And this is the basic level of spiritual development, meaning making. Can you track the satisfaction that you get from doing different activities, and can you create a hierarchy of that? So that and then can you organize your life in such a way that you spend more of your life engaged in things that are meaningful to you? Or another way to put that is, do you explore well? And have you learned to explore well? Do you know how to pursue things that have meaning and resonate with you? Or do you not know how to do that, so that you don't actually know how to find meaning in the things that you do? And we move up into the intermediate skills. Recognition of how the past shapes one's experience. And this is where we're really beginning to examine the perceptual database and how we tend to habitually form the experience of the present moment. You might talk about fixed views in this particular place, beginning to recognize that certain responses are automatic and create these fixed views, and that it limits the capacity to recognize all of the possibilities that unfold in each moment because of the restrictions that come from the way that we've habitually created the experience of conceptual reality. So number 2 in the intermediate stage is appreciating the relativity of mind states. This is again really understanding that the difference between ultimate reality and conceptual reality, that mind states change the way that experience or the perception of conceptual reality can be created, and that mind states come and go, and you can experience the present moment through a lot of different mind states, which creates a very different perception of the experience that you're having. Is that making sense? How does the world appear if the mind state is anger? How does it appear if the mind state is loving kindness? How does the experience that you're having, even if it's the same spirit experience, different with the mind state that's there? Is that making sense? Number 3, seeing beyond information given more deeply into underlying assumptions and expectations related to the information. So again, we're really diving into the capacity to mentalize. If you looked at it through an attachment lens, for instance, you would take in the idealizing of a dismissing person, but at the same time recognize that the ideal version that they're presenting is not supported by any details or any suggestion that what they're presenting actually happened, and then you would begin to investigate what might beyond the experience. So we were talking about this earlier today, reviewing an ideal parent session, and the speaker was very idealizing, but there was no evidence to support anything that he was saying. And toward the end of the interview, it became clear that actually the ideal version wasn't what was happening, that he was angry and covering the anger with idealization, so that you would begin to understand the presentation actually needs to be supported. And if it isn't supported, how you would investigate what's actually happening rather than just the appearance of what's happening. It's a higher degree of mentalizing. Making sense? Optimizing action plans in the face of an accurate awareness of limitations. One of the things that happens in idealizing, which is the dismissing side, or in the preoccupied side, there's an imagined special relationship that is often created in the mind of a preoccupied person. And that's not tied into the actual agreed upon a relationship with the other person. Let me know if I'm getting too difficult to understand as I try to describe this. What happens to preoccupied people in this experience that they have of a special relationship with someone else, where the other person doesn't actually have that experience, is an abrupt and humiliating, shame-inducing experience when the reality is revealed. And so what we need to begin to do is actually track what these agreements are explicitly between the people that you're in relationship to, and base your intentions and actions to them based on the collaborative relationship, not on your version of it, which you actually haven't explicitly validated with the other person. Fostering sensitivity to contextual effects on behavior. We were talking about this in the other system in a way. Have you ever had an intimate relationship with someone and the relationship is really smooth and easy, and then they want you to meet their family, and so you go home with them? And they act completely differently than anybody you've ever met before because they're in a different context that has a lot of connections, a lot of effects on behavior, and that you would then be sensitive to recognizing that the context in which the person is has an effect on the way that they present themselves, and you would find a way of relating with that without getting completely undone by the experience of the person that you know is acting in a completely different way. Does that make sense? Christian.
Is that a sign of some kind of dysfunction, or is that a totally different thing? Because I have this ideal for myself that I could be sort of the same person in every context, which is kind of absurd when you say it out loud. But is that like is that like a secure thing, or is that kind of a sign of some kind of insecure functioning?
I would say the more authentic you are, the more likely it is that you'll be similar in across different circumstances, but that because the experience of the present moment always arises dependent on the conditions of the present moment, different conditions are going to create a different effect. And that the sensitivity to that is to understand the context in which the person is responding, so that you can really understand what's happening with them, rather than getting disoriented by how different they can be. So rather than saying, I can't believe you did that to me, you would say, this is so out of character. Why are you acting that way? What, not from an accusatory place, but help me understand what's happening so that I can better respond to it. And then the sixth one in the intermediate is the perspective taking, or the ability to consider something from another's point of view. So that's really that final step there, where you really are seeing the person in the context that they're in and understanding how they're reacting to it. I think there's an English colloquialism. If I were you, then maybe I would do the same thing, but I'm not you. So really being able to take that in. Then when we move into the advanced metacognitive skills, taking a wider super systemic perspective. So then we're getting into a match with a metamodern list of being able to understand a particular system, being able to understand more than one system, and then possibly beginning to bridge across systems. Now, number 2 is developing metacognitive awareness of past and present, self and other, child, adult orientations. I think we might be able to describe this in the experience of self arising and the perspective of self that arises. One of the practices that's Western that we sometimes do is called forgiveness practice, and the phrases are, forgive me, I forgive you, I forgive myself. And it's actually a pretty good way to begin to understand the perspective, that self perspective. Forgive me, so you're holding responsibility in your current self. Forgive me. I forgive you. You could, for instance, hold your present moment self and forgive a past self for some transgression. And that would be a different perspective, a different orientation. I forgive myself. That either could come from the perspective of the present moment experience, or also come from the perspective of two self experiences being held at the same time. I forgive you, meaning another self experience. I forgive myself, two self experiences there. Is that making sense? So what's coming to mind is Chef Boyardee ravioli. When you were a kid, did you eat Chef Boyardee ravioli? No, I grew up in Chicago in the 50s. And so the whole world was entranced with canned foods. And Chef Boyardee was a little chef on the can, and it was filled with ravioli, and it came in a tomato sauce. And as a child, if I hold that perspective, I loved Chef Boyardee ravioli, but I have happened to eat them as an adult, and it tasted like sugar syrup dumped on soggy noodles. It was a horrifying experience. Did you ever have SpaghettiOs when you were a kid? Little brown pasta things and a tomato sauce. If you eat it, there's so much sugar in it. It's like a dessert, and the noodles are completely mushy. You can hardly even feel them with your teeth. You could dissolve them with your tongue just by rubbing them against the roof of your mouth. but they were a highly coveted gourmet treat for a child. Can you hold both of those? The delight of the child eating SpaghettiOs and the adult version that would never go anywhere near them. Awareness of the degree of organization or coherence of one's mind. This is quite, sorry, I've been talking all day. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being totally coherent and 1 being totally incoherent, where is your mind now? Can you develop that capacity in real time to track that? How coherent is your narrative? Do you understand what happened to you? Do you understand the effects that it had on you? Do you understand how that informed the decisions that you made that have gotten you to the place where you are now? Or can you not really explain that very well? How coherent is that? Coherence of mind, of course, is affected by the level of stress that you're in. Can you track in real time the ups and downs of the capacity to think coherently? At a certain point, when emotional dysregulation gets so great you can't mentalize, can you track the loss of mentalizing in real time? Number 4 is recognition of inner dependence. In attachment, of course, we talk about this in terms of the development of collaborative relationship skills, but we're all born as autoregulators. We're totally disconnected from any kind of thinking way of relating to other people. But as our brains develop in the first months of life, if a caregiver comes regularly enough, then we begin to orient toward an external regulator. And if they're reliable enough, as the brain develops, we enter into a collaborative experience of regulation with them. And we recognize the value of it and also the interdependence that's required of that. As we get older and we begin to express ourselves authentically, we begin to understand that in that interdependent relationship with someone else, we're actually able to see ourselves reflected back in their experience of us, and we're able to track that and understand that. How we know ourselves actually comes through that reflection, and to then begin to evaluate. I often call it valuing attachment, valuing that interdependence, that we really can't survive in a thriving way if we are not interdependent with other people, and then we can extend that outward to interdependence on all of the systems of the planet we're on, of the world. Number 5 is articulating ultimate concerns. In the meditation world, then we would be, I think, focusing on the goal of enlightenment and really understanding the nature of the human condition and our place in it, and then being able to actually express those concerns so that we understand them and we're also able to articulate them. 6 is direct non-representational awareness of a wider reality. These are, I usually think of these as unitive experiences, merging experiences in Zen, the expansive experiences, sometimes in Theravada and sometimes in Tibetan practice, where you're in the experience of awareness and phenomena is arising and passing, and it doesn't need to be fixated into anything in particular. You're just be able to hold the whole experience of awareness and inhabit that. In Dan's teaching, that was the six lamps teaching, which creates that kind of spaciousness where you're simply awareness. In jhana, what we're talking about then is probably eighth jhana if you've done the shamatha kind of work. I've not ever really practiced Zen, but I understand from people's descriptions of unitive experiences that it makes sense to me that it would be similar. And then the last one is the highest order metacognitive skills such as spacious freedom and wisdom. And so we might call that the experience of enlightenment, and that complete freedom from identification and access to the wisdom mind that communicates really in a way that is unconscious. Not making sense? As a map. So what I think of as advanced mentalizing skills is all of these things together, all of these different lists, understanding the nature of them, understanding where you are in terms of your development, and then focusing intentionally on moving from the place you are to the next level. And I've always appreciated Dharma maps and these different kinds of Dharma maps. I like the openness of the systemic approach of this, coupled with the spiritual approach to this, that we can use the systemic science of the West and we can relate it to the spiritual map and create this capacity to communicate across these maps so that we can use the technology of these old spiritual practices to further the development of mentalizing, but also be able to frame it in a way that it isn't merely, and I use that with humorous quotes, merely the search for enlightenment, but the place of an enlightened engagement in the care of all of us together on the planet, because we are getting to a place where we need to do some system-wide changes, or we're going to run out of food in a scale that really I don't think we've experienced before. Now I know that the history is a succession of these tramplings of the four horsemen, let's say, but Christian.
So do you think that a practitioner that's not so much into Dharma maps, like maybe what I understand more of a Zen approach, like just kind of sit, do you think they're missing out on something or not practicing some levels of mentalization through that approach?
No, I don't think that. I think that in the understanding of the context of that system, you move through the process. If you're in the Rinzai end, you're doing the koans, and if you're in the Soto end, you're opening into awareness. What I notice, or maybe my complaint, having grown up basically in Judeo-Christian society, where charity and involvement in community is more likely to be one of the spiritual tenets that are expressed, whereas in the Asian tradition, where karma often is the vehicle that absolves people from responsibility across the society. that we need. I just have a strong sense that we need to understand the nature of the human condition and to apply it more in a more systematic way, so that everybody has the possibility of being resourced to pursue a meaningful life. And I don't think it's a question of not enough resources. I think it's a question of distribution of resources, and that there needs to be some shift in this understanding of it. Because right now, in this country, we are just pulling all of the resources out of everybody and sticking them into the top 100th% of the population. Now, admittedly, that will provide the very privileged few the opportunity to develop these advanced levels of mentalizing, but can we rely on that? And at what cost, really, to the bottom 50% of people who just cease to exist? This troubles me, and I don't think that practicing a 1,000-year-old Zen tradition is going to move the system much. So engaging in the spiritual practices and in really seeing clearly and through the practices which really do illustrate this very well and teach this very well and develop the capacity for this advanced mentalizing, and then to use the advanced mentalizing in these paradigm shifts that we need. And if we don't do that, then it will be what we've created. And one of my favorite Zen sayings is, if you don't change the direction you're going, you're likely to end up where you're heading. So anyway, we have these existential threats, which I like to talk about: nuclear war, climate change, and runaway tech. And we seem to be in a moment in our existence here where all three of them seem to be quite pronounced. And how the modern view is that technology will come up with with a way of addressing this, so that we don't have to change the system. The postmodern view is that they're relative values rather than absolute values, but the destruction of the planets or our species can't survive seems different than that. And then in this metamodern perspective, creating the capacity to communicate across these systems so that we actually can align without people having to abandon or adopt somebody else's system. Really, one of the things that we tend to do is get very rigid in our thought processes and think that everybody has to see the world in the way that we see it, which is the collapse of mentalizing. I'm not particularly inclined to give up my metamodern perspective to adopt a postmodern or a modern or a post-Faustian point of view. And I have a great deal of trouble relating the points of view of the different systems. And I said this earlier, but the thing I appreciated about Dan is he was so skillful at being able to relate the traditional Tibetan practice to the Western mind, so that these places that with other teachers that I sit with just leave me completely indifferent were lively and engaging. What do you say we do a quick period of sitting before we come to the end? And I think I've said enough about advanced mentalizing, and we'll go on to a new topic next time. So go ahead and settle in. We'll do some basic see, hear, feel. So any comments and questions about the practice we just did? Questions about something else? Thank you all for coming and practicing. Let's see what's happening. We're going to do a level 1 in the end of June into July. I think it should be up on the website soon if that interests you. We're going to do another level 2 starting at the end of the summer. If you're interested in the attachment material, that's our scheduling for that. We have an in-person retreat at 7 Circles in October. Yes, Stas. It's on Razuku. And we're just doing a preliminary putting together of a meditation trip to Asia for next January, end of January and February, so 2023. We'll go to Chiang Mai in Thailand. It's going to be organized around ecotourism, which is we're going to meet a monk, and we're going to walk around the base of this mountain that's considered a holy site, exploring the different ecologies, staying with local people in the mountains. And then once we get across the mountain, we'll go to a monastery and have an instruction of in the Thai forest tradition of Theravada Buddhism. And then come down, and I think I am curious about Bangkok, and so maybe do a day there or a couple of days there, and then the south of Thailand, Phuket, and the different places which are the sort of where the spiritual bypassing community lives. Go down there and see what they're up to. They come home. That's the idea. So we're hoping that we can get 15 people to come, and so as that develops, I'll keep you informed. But it's nice to be able to consider going back to Asia to practice. Obviously, Myanmar is not in a place where we can go back there. I offer the teaching freely, but I do hope that you'll make a donation and help support me and also the work that we're doing at Mettagroup. There's a link on the site to make a donation. Really appreciate your practice. Thank you for coming, and then we'll see you soon, I hope, somewhere along the path. Bye now.